6-year-old Modesta grew up under heartbreaking circumstances. Her childhood was spent in a fragile mud and thatch house where there was never enough food to satisfy her hunger. She was forced to do all the household chores and tend the goats, while her mother devoted all her affection to her disabled younger sister. One day, driven by unbearable hunger, she stole an egg. Her mother responded with a brutal slap. At night, her bed was nothing more than a cold corner beneath the family bed. The humiliation reached its peak when she secretly tried on her sister's ceremonial dress. As punishment, she was hung outside under the scorching sun, treated less like a child and more like a criminal. Countless times, Modesta dreamed of escaping her cruel life. Then one day, her father returned, a violent man who was rarely around. He was not the source of hope she had imagined, but the beginning of a new nightmare. He even locked her mother and younger sister inside the goat pen. At first, Modesta believed she was receiving special attention. However, she soon realized that her father's behavior and the way he looked at her had crossed boundaries no child should ever face. Terrified and confused, she endured a traumatic experience beyond words, one that left deep scars on both her body and her soul. Late that night, after everyone had fallen asleep, Modesta quietly made her way to the goat pen to find her mother. In her panic, she accidentally knocked over an oil lamp. The flames quickly spread through the dry hay, turning into a raging fire. The door was right in front of her, and she could have opened it to save them, but then a thought flashed through her mind. If they survived, she would be forced to return to the life she hated. As the heat and ashes brushed against her face, it felt like a baptism by fire. The devastating fire claimed the lives of her father, mother, and sister, while also destroying the invisible chains that had imprisoned her entire life. Overnight, Modesta became an orphan with nowhere to go and was taken in temporarily by a convent. No one knew the truth about what had happened that night. Most believed it was simply a tragic accident, while evidence found at the scene suggested possible arson by an unknown intruder, drawing the attention of the police. When the nuns discovered unusual signs of abuse on Modesta's body, their compassion for her grew even stronger. For the first time in her life, she was bathed, dressed in clean clothes, and allowed to eat until she was full. Yet the convent was never meant to be her permanent home. For more than 2 centuries, it had served only the daughters of Sicily's most prestigious families. Modesta's wild habits quickly became a challenge for the nuns. She had never been taught basic manners. Knives and forks were completely foreign to her, so she continued eating with her hands. No one had ever shown her how to use a proper toilet either. Whenever she needed to relieve herself, she instinctively searched for a patch of bushes. If she heard someone approaching, she would panic, pull up her clothes, and run off to find another hiding place. Eventually, Modesta found a wardrobe. After making sure no one was around, she closed the door and used it as a restroom. Not long afterward, during a prayer service, a horrified scream echoed through the convent. Someone had discovered Modesta's masterpiece inside the wardrobe. The sympathy the nuns once felt for her vanished instantly. Modesta knew she had caused trouble, but she genuinely could not understand what she had done wrong. The nuns quickly decided that Modesta should be sent to an orphanage, a place described as being filled with fleas, hunger, and bitter cold. Naturally, she had no desire to go there. Thanks to her sharp instincts, she noticed that every nun in the convent obeyed Mother Superior Leonora without question, as if Leonora ruled the entire place. Without hesitation, Modesta broke free from the hands restraining her and rushed straight into Leonora's arms. She did not know what to say, so she simply held on as tightly as she could. It was a silent embrace, yet it carried every ounce of her desperation and hope for a chance to stay. From that moment on, fate began to turn. The beautiful and compassionate Mother Superior Leonora dismissed every objection and made the extraordinary decision to adopt the wild, untamed girl. She declared that Modesta would remain at the convent until adulthood, and if God willed it, she would one day become his bride like the other nuns. It was an act of generosity beyond imagination. To Leonora, Modesta was a gift sent by God himself. Leonora's slender fingers gently traced the girl's delicate eyebrows like a spring breeze. Softly, she sang a nursery rhyme. This eye is beautiful, and the other is its brother. Here is a little church, and these are its little monks. And this tiny nose is the bell. It rings ding, ding, ding. 6 years passed in the blink of an eye. By the age of 15, Modesta had shed all traces of childhood. She had grown into a stunning young woman whose vibrant beauty was impossible to ignore, forcing her to wear a corset to conceal her developing figure. Mother Superior Leonora adored her, personally teaching her music, embroidery, and sacred hymns. She even arranged a generous lifelong allowance for Modesta, ensuring that she would always be cared for within the convent. Modesta did everything she could to live up to Leonora's expectations. She hungered for knowledge and eagerly absorbed every lesson. Even Elena, the governor's daughter and Leonora's longtime favorite companion, was forced to move downstairs so that Modesta could take the room next to the Mother Superior. Such blatant favoritism slowly planted a deep resentment in Elena's heart. After 6 years of living closely together, Modesta's admiration for Mother Superior Leonora gradually evolved into a powerful and forbidden desire. One evening, Leonora took her up to the bell tower to gaze at the stars. There stood a telescope, a precious gift from Leonora's father. he had taught her the names of the stars, and now she wished to pass that knowledge on to Modesta. In the early 20th century, a telescope was an extraordinary luxury that few people would ever touch. Being granted access to Leonora's personal telescope was an honor every nun dreamed of receiving. In an era when men controlled nearly everything, Modesta saw in Leonora a completely different vision of womanhood. She longed to learn from her, to grow, and one day become a woman as talented, independent, and admirable as Leonora herself. Unfortunately, before they could reach the bell tower, rain suddenly began to fall. Their stargazing plans had to be postponed. Laughing together, they ran back to Leonora's room with their hair and skirts soaked through. Leonora handed Modesta a clean nightgown and gently urged her to change before she caught a cold. Wearing the oversized sleepwear of the Mother Superior, Modesta felt something stirring deep inside her. The emotions of that spring night wrapped around her heart like invisible vines. In a dreamlike state, she imagined meeting a young man who made her heart race, his eyes as blue as the sea, a sight she had never encountered in real life. Suddenly, Modesta woke up and sensed movement behind her. When she turned around, she unexpectedly witnessed a secret hidden beneath the Mother Superior's saintly image, a secret no one else knew. Before Modesta could make sense of the confusing thoughts swirling in her mind, she learned the very next day that Leonora had been urgently summoned by her family. War had broken out, and she needed to return to Catania to handle family matters. Modesta begged to accompany her, but Leonora firmly refused. Even though the separation was only temporary, the wild girl who had once been Leonora's favorite immediately became a target for the other girls. The moment the carriage disappeared from sight, the wealthy young ladies surrounded her with mockery and insults. They demanded to know which noble family she belonged to. Standing proudly in the middle of their ridicule, Modesta lifted her chin and invented a noble lineage of her own. The girls burst into laughter, claiming they had never heard of such a family. Modesta calmly replied that it came from a beautiful land filled with goats, chickens, and herds of cattle. Her confidence only irritated them further. Furious, she walked away while humiliation burned inside her like thorns wrapped around her body. At that very moment, Modesta swore that one day she would rise above the privileged elite who looked down on her. Yet that same night, an unsigned love letter was slipped beneath her door. It was filled with passionate declarations of affection and even contained a lock of golden hair. Modesta immediately convinced herself that the letter had come from Leonora. The sudden wave of happiness nearly overwhelmed her. Overjoyed, she ran to the well and leaned dangerously over the edge to admire her reflection in the water. She nearly fell in if the gardener had not grabbed her in time. He scolded her, warning that she could have been killed. Gasping for breath, Modesta innocently explained that she simply wanted to know what she looked like. She did not even know what her own eyes or mouth truly looked like, nor whether she was beautiful or ugly. The old gardener was surprised by her insecurity. He assured her that she was not ugly at all. In fact, she was as beautiful as a princess. He told her that others might look down on her like a common sparrow, but in his eyes she was more noble than anyone else in the convent. It was the first sincere compliment Modesta had ever received about her appearance. Delighted like a child receiving a long-awaited gift, Modesta rose onto her toes and impulsively begged him to stay with her. The gardener could only stare at her in confusion. Within the rigid walls of the convent, where strict rules governed every aspect of life, Modesta's blossoming youth had the potential to create trouble at any moment. Leonora finally returned, and just as they had promised, the two of them climbed the bell tower together to watch the stars. The vast night sky, filled with countless constellations, left Modesta mesmerized. When she stepped toward the railing to look down, Leonora quickly stopped her. She warned that the old railing was unstable and could collapse at any moment. One careless move could easily result in a fatal accident. Modesta's curiosity soon got the better of her. She eagerly questioned Leonora about her life before entering the convent. Leonora answered honestly. She explained that she came from an aristocratic family and that her mother had been a princess. Her youth had been filled with elegant gowns and endless ballroom parties. She had once been engaged to a German officer, but she admitted that she had always despised men. Even the slightest physical contact with them made her feel sick. Those words only poured fuel onto the fire already burning inside Modesta. She became overwhelmed with excitement. In her mind, Leonora's confession perfectly matched the anonymous love letter she had received. Unable to suppress her feelings any longer, Modesta finally let everything out. All the longing, the secret desires, and the yearning she had carried since their separation burst forth in a passionate confession of love. Leonora's face immediately turned pale with horror. She exclaimed that Modesta had gone too far and quickly pushed her away. Panicking, Leonora began begging the Virgin Mary and God for forgiveness. She ordered Modesta to leave at once, all while muttering prayers and condemning her own sinful thoughts. Terrified and heartbroken, Modesta fled. As she ran away, she collided with the old gardener, who was tending a fire. Staring into the dancing flames, Modesta became lost in thought. The fire looked exactly like the blaze she had started years ago. Tears shimmered in the firelight. The flames that had once given her freedom had never truly gone out. They had merely remained hidden deep within her soul, waiting for the chance to rise again and consume every longing she carried inside. The following day, Modesta was subjected to a cruel punishment. An elderly nun handed her a heart-shaped pin and ordered her to press it into her flesh beneath her corset as an act of spiritual purification. The punishment came directly from the Mother Superior. A sharp pain pierced her body, and blood quickly soaked through the pristine white bandages. In a single night, she had fallen from heaven into hell. Locked away in a dark and damp confessional room, Modesta became the laughingstock of the entire convent. For 3 months, she survived on nothing more than a small piece of bread each day. She was not afraid of pain, punishment, or hunger. What she could not accept was the fact that Leonora had abandoned her and no longer cherished her as she once had. That realization slowly gave birth to a plan. First, she pretended to faint in order to earn permission to work outside in the garden, but that alone was not enough. The old gardener then revealed a secret. Before Modesta arrived, there had been another girl whom Leonora had loved dearly. That girl was eventually locked inside the same confessional room. Day after day, consumed by despair, she finally ended her own life by throwing herself from an upper-story window. Ever since then, Leonora had been haunted by the tragedy and terrified of seeing it happen again. That fear was one of the reasons she had shown such compassion toward Modesta. To most people, the story was a tragic warning. To Modesta, however, it sounded like the perfect opportunity. Modesta knew exactly what she had to do to make the other girls stop mocking her. One quiet afternoon, without a moment of hesitation, she threw herself into the convent's deep well. When she opened her eyes again, the first thing she saw was Mother Superior Leonora's familiar yet heartbroken gaze. Just like in the early days, Leonora was once again sitting by her bedside, caring for her. For a brief moment, Modesta believed she had won once again. She had always been that kind of person. To get what she wanted, she was willing to gamble with her own life. But no one wins forever. Her desperate performance was quickly exposed by Elena. Standing nearby, Elena mocked her, saying that Modesta had survived only because she screamed loudly enough while falling and had carefully timed her jump so the gardener would be passing by. Hearing those words, Leonora turned away in disappointment. The more Modesta thought about it, the more suspicious she became. She secretly slipped into Elena's room, opened a drawer, and discovered a lock of blonde hair along with practice letters written to imitate Leonora's handwriting. Everything suddenly made sense. At that exact moment, Elena returned, and a confrontation erupted. Elena mocked Modesta for being unloved and pitiful, calling her nothing more than a peasant girl who smelled of goats. She cruelly added that Modesta's greatest enemy had never been anyone else, it had always been herself. After hearing everything, Leonora was furious. She demanded to know why Modesta had done such things. Through tears, Modesta shouted that Elena was the real deceiver and that she had been manipulated, but Leonora refused to listen. She felt betrayed by the very person she had trusted most. In a cold voice, she announced that Modesta would be sent to an orphanage the following day. With tears in her eyes, Modesta immediately begged for mercy. She fell to her knees, promising to remain imprisoned, to pray day and night, and to repent for her sins. But this time, none of her tactics worked. Leonora had already chosen a different path for her. At the orphanage, Modesta could learn a trade and eventually become a seamstress or a governess. Naturally, she would also lose the lifelong allowance Leonora had arranged for her, since it was meant only for truly devout women, and Modesta clearly did not fit that description. Leonora's final act of kindness was to promise that a doctor would provide documentation proving that Modesta had lost her virginity through abuse rather than consent, but those words became the final straw. Modesta exploded in anger. She shouted that she would never become a governess, never marry, and never serve anyone. Leonora paid little attention to her outburst. The only thing she cared about was warning Modesta never to speak of what had happened between them, fearing that her true feelings might be exposed. Leonora's hypocrisy and denial finally pushed Modesta beyond her limits. She mocked Leonora's cowardice and even imitated the embarrassing sounds Leonora had made on that unforgettable night. Consumed by rage, she screamed that she hated her. As love and heartbreak transformed into resentment sharp enough to serve as a weapon, Modesta finally broke free from her obsession, and in the mud of sin, pain, and betrayal, she discovered a new kind of freedom for herself. In the stillness of the night, Modesta quietly waited atop the bell tower. As expected, Leonora arrived to admire the stars. Slowly, Modesta stood up and asked for a hug. Believing it was a gesture of reconciliation, Leonora stepped forward and gently embraced her. But in that very moment, something changed in Modesta's expression. It was Leonora herself who had once warned her that the railing was old and unsafe, that the gardener had repeatedly urged her to replace it. Tragically, that well-intentioned warning would become the very thing that sealed her fate. The railing suddenly gave way. Leonora and the splintered wood plunged from the tower to the ground below. At the same time, it felt as though the most passionate part of Modesta's heart had shattered as well. The next morning, an elderly nun entered her room with tear-filled eyes and announced that the Mother Superior had died. Modesta pretended to grieve and even feigned fainting. She believed the situation would eventually settle down. What she never expected was that the elderly nun would become the new Mother Superior, a woman who had never liked her. After officially taking power, the new Mother Superior wasted no time. The very first thing she did was contact the orphanage, eager to get rid of Modesta once and for all. For the first time, Modesta almost regretted what she had done. She had personally helped place authority into the hands of her greatest enemy. With no other choice, she packed her belongings. Accompanied by the old gardener, she walked out of the convent for what would likely be the last time. A black automobile approached from the distance, a modern machine unlike anything Modesta had ever seen before. Trembling, she climbed inside and tightly held the gardener's hand for one final goodbye. Deep down, both of them knew they would probably never meet again. The car rolled past endless golden wheat fields. In her half-conscious state, Modesta imagined seeing the faces of her deceased family members and even Leonora among the fields. Exhaustion soon carried her into sleep. When the driver woke her up, Modesta opened her eyes to find herself in a completely unfamiliar place. Instead of the miserable orphanage she had expected, a magnificent country estate stood before her, grand and imposing. The driver unloaded her luggage and departed, leaving her standing there in confusion. An elderly butler emerged, took her bags, and motioned for her to follow. As she walked behind him through long hallways lined with gilded paintings and luxurious furnishings, it became increasingly clear that this place looked nothing like an orphanage. Her curiosity and confusion only grew stronger. The butler led her to a bedroom and explained that if she needed anything, she would not have to leave the room. All she had to do was pull the brown cord beside the bed, and someone would come immediately. After thanking him, Modesta shyly asked where she was and what she was supposed to do. The butler simply smiled and told her to be patient. Everything would be explained soon enough. Hours passed, from late afternoon until well after midnight, yet no one came to see her. Her initial fear gradually faded and was replaced by curiosity. She began examining the elegant objects decorating the lavish room. Suddenly, a horrifying roar echoed from the upper floor, sounding more like a wild beast than a human being. Terrified, she rushed to lock her door, but the sound did not stop. It grew louder and closer with every passing moment. In panic, she shut the windows tightly and curled up on the bed, trembling with fear throughout the entire night. The next morning, a maid arrived right on time with breakfast. She chattered away like an excited child. Before Modesta could even ask a question, the girl eagerly began explaining everything. This was the summer estate of the Brandeforti family, and its owner was Princess Gioia. It was Gioia herself who had ordered Modesta to be brought here. Modesta's heart tightened. She remembered Leonora mentioning the Brandeforti family before. Had someone discovered what really happened on the bell tower? Fear left her unable to touch her breakfast, yet her curiosity about Leonora's family pushed her forward. Sneaking into the main hall, she hid behind the lush decorative plants. Suddenly, she found herself staring into a pair of ocean blue eyes. A young woman was looking back at her with equal curiosity before smiling and waving hello. Modesta hesitantly stepped forward and finally met Princess Gioia, an elegant and noble woman, yet a single glance from her was enough to send chills down anyone's spine. Gioia introduced the young woman beside her as Mattia, though everyone affectionately called her Little Pony. She was Leonora's younger sister. Since Leonora had entered the convent before Mattia was born, the two sisters had never actually met. Princess Gioia explained that she had invited Modesta to the estate for two reasons. First, she wanted to meet the young woman whom Leonora had cared for so deeply. Second, she intended to uncover the truth behind her daughter's death. Every question she asked subtly suggested that Modesta herself might be a suspect. Modesta's heart pounded in her chest, but she calmly replied that Leonora had appeared completely normal on the night of the accident. She repeated that the bell tower railing had been deteriorating for years and that the gardener had repeatedly urged Leonora to replace it. However, Leonora could never bring herself to remove it because of its beautiful craftsmanship. In the end, that sentimentality had led to tragedy. As she spoke, tears welled up in Modesta's eyes and her voice trembled with grief. Whether genuine or not, her sorrow seemed to soften Gaia's suspicions. The princess invited her to remain at the estate for a while longer. After the funeral, Leonora's lifelong allowance would still require official paperwork before it could be granted. Little Pony enthusiastically gave Modesta a tour of the estate. Perhaps because she had spent so long isolated from the outside world, the young aristocrat quickly opened up and shared her family's story. Her father had died years ago, her brother had been killed in the war, and now Leonora was gone as well. Even though they were all dead, their rooms remained untouched and were cleaned daily by servants. As a result, the entire estate felt haunted by memories. Mother and daughter lived almost like recluses, surrounded by the ghosts of the past, as though they were guarding a living mausoleum. Little Pony also revealed that she had been disabled since childhood and that one of her legs had withered. "That's why my mother calls me Little Pony," she explained before asking whether Modesta pitied her. Without hesitation, Modesta replied, "Why would I pity you? You're beautiful." Modesta understood that from this point forward, she needed to be extremely careful with every word and action. the only way to avoid suspicion was to present herself as a devout and obedient believer. She spent most of her days praying in the estate's chapel. Whenever Little Pony asked curious questions, Modesta carefully considered every response before speaking, yet deep inside, she still longed for the world beyond these walls. Surrounded by wealth and privilege, desires she thought had long been buried began growing once more like wild weeds. Instinctively, she felt that the Brandeforti estate might become the turning point that would change her destiny forever. On the day of the funeral, Modesta was allowed to wear an elegant dress. It was the first time in her life she had ever worn something so beautiful, and she couldn't hold back her tears. The maid assumed she was crying because of the mourning clothes and quickly reassured her that she only had to wear them for a few days to please Princess Gaia. Her nun's habit was still there, and no one would ever know, but Modesta knew those tears came from something else entirely. She was overwhelmed by the experience. Turning to Little Pony, she asked if the dress looked too extravagant. The young woman smiled and told her it was beautiful before asking whether she liked it herself. The following day, Modesta returned to the chapel as usual. On the surface, she appeared deeply devoted, but in reality she was carefully plotting how to remain at the estate. What she didn't realize was that Little Pony, exhausted by years of loneliness and monotony, had already become fascinated by her unique presence. Modesta found the situation irritating because she had more important things to worry about, yet as they spent more time together, she couldn't completely ignore the feelings beginning to stir inside her. Around that time, the driver Rocco appeared, wanting someone to talk to. Modesta joined him for a walk around the estate. During their conversation, Rocco revealed a dangerous secret. He was a deserter who had abandoned the army because he didn't want to die meaninglessly for Italy. If discovered, he would face severe punishment. Even Rocco couldn't explain why he was telling her this. He simply felt that she was someone he could trust. The feeling of having no control over one's own destiny was something Modesta understood all too well. In return for Rocco's honesty, Modesta admitted that she had never truly been meant to become a nun. Whenever she prayed, her heart never belonged to any higher power. The two were deeply engaged in conversation when a maid interrupted them and announced that Princess Gaia was waiting for Modesta in her study. In the study, Princess Gaia explained that a notary would soon arrive. Once the necessary documents were signed, Modesta would be free to return to the convent. But before that, Gaia wanted to ask one final question: had Leonora taken her own life? Beneath her trembling voice lay a deep sense of guilt and regret. Modesta immediately sensed her emotional vulnerability and firmly replied that it had been nothing more than a tragic accident. She insisted that Leonora had found peace in the convent and had lived a happy and fulfilled life there. Whether true or not, those words perfectly soothed Gaia's hidden fears and earned Modesta even more of her trust. When the notary arrived, Leonora's will was read aloud. To ensure Modesta would always have financial security, Leonora had arranged for her to receive an annual allowance of 1,800 lira from her personal estate. The payments would continue for the rest of Modesta's life. However, there was one crucial condition: if she abandoned religious life and chose to live as a civilian, she would lose the allowance entirely. Those final words weighed heavily on Modesta. She had already been expelled from the convent and had no realistic way of returning. Reflecting on everything, she realized that if the orphanage carriage had arrived on time, she never would have ended up in Princess Gaia's automobile in the first place. Suppressing her anxiety, Modesta followed the formal procedure and signed the documents. As she did so, she noticed that besides Princess Gaia, a large middle-aged man was also present as a witness. His name was Carmen. Although technically a tenant farmer, he managed the estate's finances, business dealings, workers, and livestock. The amount of authority he wielded revealed just how deeply Gaia trusted him, yet none of that truly mattered to Modesta at that moment. What occupied her thoughts was the growing realization that her departure from the estate seemed to be drawing closer and closer. During the dinner party that evening, Princess Gaia hosted numerous guests. As everyone laughed and chatted, a terrifying beast-like roar suddenly echoed from upstairs once again, yet Gaia's expression never changed. She calmly continued her conversation as though nothing had happened. The guests silently played along, pretending they hadn't heard anything unusual. Noticing this, Modesta quietly pulled Little Pony aside and whispered, "Can I ask what's up there on the top floor?" Little Pony replied softly, "Something is up there." "Then what is it?" Modesta asked. Little Pony shook her head. "I don't know, I've never seen it." With that, she hurried away and simply said, "Good night, Modesta." Late that night, Modesta found herself unable to sleep. The thought that in only 2 days she might be wandering the streets with nowhere to go haunted her relentlessly. Then, the following day, Rocco unexpectedly came to see her. As it turned out, he had fallen in love with her the moment he first laid eyes on her. Knowing that Modesta had no desire to return to the convent, he made a proposal. If she agreed to marry him, he would ask Princess Gaia for permission. That way, she could remain at the estate legitimately. Besides, she could read and write, which meant she could easily find work there as well. Modesta neither accepted nor rejected the proposal. She simply responded with a few vague remarks. Although she felt no romantic affection for Rocco, she understood that this marriage might be the only practical solution to her immediate problems. A marriage built on calculation rather than love. Could this be the path that would allow her to remain at the estate? Meanwhile, Princess Gioia also seemed saddened by the thought of Modesta leaving. Though quiet and reserved, Modesta was intelligent, engaging, and knew how to listen. Those qualities had made Gioia genuinely fond of her. Thinking that they might never see each other again, the princess finally let down her guard and revealed a shocking family secret. Little Pony was not Leonora's sister at all, she was Leonora's daughter. Gioia explained that Leonora could have had a perfect life, but she became pregnant by a man she was unable to marry. To hide the scandal, the family was forced to tell the world that Little Pony was Leonora's younger sister. After giving birth, the convent became Leonora's only refuge. She never forgave us, and honestly, I can understand why. Gioia sighed. She refused to see us and even tore up all my letters. If it had been my decision, I would have kept her by my side. But in this country, fathers and husbands are always the ones who make the final decisions. Hearing the truth left Modesta overwhelmed with conflicting emotions. So Leonora had lied to her as well. The shameful secret no one wanted to acknowledge had been transformed into a romantic tale about a noble engagement to a German officer. Deception, betrayal, disappointment. The revelations collided violently inside her mind, leaving her restless and unable to find peace. In a dreamlike haze, Modesta saw the Virgin Mary shed her usual image of purity and grace. Instead, she lounged lazily against a bedpost, radiating a dangerous and irresistible allure. Yet when Modesta turned around, the figure before her transformed into Little Pony. These tangled relationships and layered secrets drew the two lonely souls closer together. That night, Modesta could no longer restrain herself. For the first time in her life, she experienced what it felt like to be loved. Little Pony's pure affection was like a warm campfire in the darkness, illuminating the barren landscape of Modesta's heart. Like a moth drawn to a flame, she rushed toward that light without hesitation, even knowing it might burn her. In a way that seemed almost unbelievable, Modesta gradually became part of the Brandeforti family. Whether she liked it or not, she would never fully escape Leonora's shadow. Somehow, she herself had become the most vivid reminder of the woman who was gone. At last, Modesta made her decision. She sought out Rocco and pretended to return his feelings, accepting his marriage proposal. Rocco barely had time to process his joy when a servant's desperate cries suddenly echoed from upstairs. "Come quickly. I can't hold him anymore. Hurry, Rocco. He's gone mad." Rocco immediately rushed upstairs, with Modesta following close behind. As they climbed the staircase, the terrifying roars grew louder and louder, filling the air with tension. When they reached the room on the top floor, the servant warned Modesta to stay back because the monster inside was extremely dangerous. While the two men entered, Modesta quietly peeked through the doorway. To her surprise, there was no monster at all. Instead, she saw a man with his hands tied. Though his appearance was unusual, he was clearly human. Gathering her courage, Modesta stepped closer and reached out to touch him. Almost instantly, something remarkable happened. The man's violent outburst began to fade, and he slowly calmed down. The servants were stunned by what they witnessed. A miracle. They cried, "The young lady is a saint. It's a miracle. He's calm now. I can't believe it, she's a saint." Later, Modesta learned that the so-called monster was actually Ippolito, Princess Gioia's youngest son. Born with physical deformities and intellectual disabilities, he had long been treated as a source of shame. Gioia especially despised him and wanted as little to do with him as possible. Everyone on the estate feared him. Only Modesta saw something different. To her, Ippolito was not a burden but a gift from fate. In her eyes, he was the most valuable card she could possibly play. The truth was far less miraculous. Modesta could calm Ippolito because she had spent years caring for her younger sister, who had Down syndrome. Life had a strange sense of irony. The very hardships she had endured as a child had now become the golden key that could unlock the doors of high society. Ippolito's improvement amazed Princess Gioia. In recent days, his terrifying outbursts had nearly disappeared, allowing her to enjoy a good night's sleep for the first time in ages. Carefully choosing her words, Gioia asked Modesta to remain at the estate a while longer and continue caring for him. It was exactly what Modesta had hoped for. Thrilled by the news, Modesta eagerly sought out Little Pony to share it with her. The two met secretly among the garden hedges. Unfortunately, Carmen, the estate manager, happened to walk by and caught sight of them together. He merely nodded politely before continuing on his way, yet the encounter immediately set off alarm bells in Modesta's mind. For the first time, she feared that their secret relationship might have been discovered. Little Pony, however, seemed completely unconcerned. Instead, she revealed another secret. "They say Carmen is actually my father." As it turned out, Carmen was the man Leonora had loved but could never marry. Years earlier, Leonora's father had chosen to sacrifice his daughter's happiness rather than dismiss Carmen. The reason was simple: the tenant farmer possessed extraordinary talent and management skills that the Brandeforti family could not afford to lose. That was why Princess Gioia trusted him more than anyone else. Learning the truth left Modesta both shocked and enlightened. She began to understand the true value of power. A few months later, Modesta had fully adapted to life at the estate. Not only did she take excellent care of Ippolito, but she also took the initiative to learn every aspect of running the property. Her ambition and dedication impressed Princess Gioia more and more. Eventually, Gioia proposed that Modesta begin assisting Carmen in managing the family's affairs. Carmen responded with a dismissive snort. He bluntly declared that Modesta was far too young and inexperienced. Princess Gioia argued that women were just as capable of managing an estate as men, but Carmen remained openly contemptuous. He insisted that he had no interest in taking on an apprentice. Carmine's attitude finally angered Gioia. Once she made a decision, no one was allowed to challenge it. She declared that she trusted Modesta completely, and that was all that mattered. Then she ordered Carmen, "From this day forward, you will address her as your mistress. Say it now and get used to it." The proud man lowered his head in silence. "What was that, Your Highness?" "I'm sorry, I didn't hear anything," Gioia immediately shot back. "You didn't hear it because you haven't said it yet." "Then say it," she demanded firmly. Under pressure from the most powerful woman on the estate, Carmen finally gave in. Reluctantly, he addressed Modesta as little mistress before walking away, yet the contempt in his eyes never disappeared. Ironically, that very attitude only strengthened Modesta's determination. She threw herself into her work with remarkable intensity. From olive harvest yields and vineyard records to labor strikes at the northern mine, she wanted to understand and oversee everything. Despite knowing almost nothing about the outside world, Modesta learned quickly. She was determined to win the game of destiny unfolding before her. But the road to ambition is never free of obstacles. Watching Modesta rise higher and higher, Rocco grew increasingly uneasy. Weeks had passed, and he believed it was time to announce their engagement. When Modesta kept postponing the matter with excuses about being busy, Rocco took matters into his own hands and drove her to a secluded location to talk privately. After stopping the car, Rocco revealed that he had heard troubling rumors about her past. On one hand, he acted sympathetic. On the other, he subtly used those secrets to pressure her. "Don't worry," he said, "I won't judge you the way others do. Sooner or later, we'll leave this place together anyway, won't we? We'll go live with my family in San Vito. No one there will know anything about your past. You won't have to work. I'll take care of you." His words sounded loving and reassuring, yet beneath them lay a desire to control. Rocco was trying to turn Modesta's vulnerabilities into chains that would bind her to him. Deep down, she responded with silent contempt. Outwardly, she remained gentle and comforting, but her mind was already searching for another way out. At the same time, Little Pony was becoming another source of frustration for Modesta. Raised as a pampered aristocrat, she lived almost entirely in the world of romance, believing that true love meant abandoning everything else to be together. She could not understand the struggles of people from lower social classes, nor could she fully appreciate the burdens Modesta carried as the estate's manager. Yet it was precisely that innocence that allowed her to love without conditions. Modesta adored that purity, but she also knew that Little Pony would never truly understand her. More than once, she found herself wishing that Little Pony were just a little sharper, because then she might have become a valuable ally. Fighting alone was exhausting, but Modesta had no other choice. The future remained uncertain. Princess Gioia could change her mind and send her away at any moment. That was why Modesta needed to seize every opportunity to secure her place within the estate. Only by becoming as indispensable as Carmen could she gain real protection, and in this game of power, the most important piece on the board was Ippolito. One day, while Modesta was reviewing the estate records, Ippolito suddenly became agitated and rushed toward her. Startled, she cried out for help. Fortunately, the servants arrived in time, and she escaped unharmed. After hearing about the incident, Princess Gioia ordered the steward to find a local woman to help satisfy the prince's physical needs. However, it wasn't long before Modesta saw the woman storming out of the estate in frustration. The situation immediately sparked Modesta's curiosity. Disguising herself, she secretly traveled to the village to find the woman and learn the truth. When questioned about the prince, the woman awkwardly explained that Ippolito was actually very simple-minded. He knew virtually nothing about relationships between men and women. That revelation was a turning point. Why shouldn't she marry a prince of the Brandeforti family? No matter how innocent or intellectually limited Ippolito was, he was still a legitimate noble heir. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that this could be the perfect way to secure her future. A bold and dangerous plan slowly began to take shape in her mind. On her way back, Modesta happened to run into Carmen. He insisted on escorting her to the estate. Before leaving, he casually congratulated her on her upcoming marriage, his tone carrying a deeper meaning. Instantly, Modesta understood. The previous night, while drunk, Rocco had revealed their engagement to Carmen. Her expression darkened immediately. She immediately confronted Rocco and demanded to know why he had been telling everyone about their engagement. Rocco was furious as well. In his eyes, Modesta had been deceiving him from the beginning. "You need to tell me the truth," he said through clenched teeth. "Do you actually want to marry me or not? Look me in the eyes and answer me." Modesta did not hesitate for a second. "I will never marry you," she replied in a voice as cold as ice. After publicly ending things with Rocco, Modesta's ambitious plan truly began. The following day, while reading to Ippolito, she deliberately lifted her skirt in a calculated gesture. Innocent and unable to understand the situation, Ippolito interpreted it as an invitation and immediately rushed toward her without a second thought. The doctor nervously informed Princess Gioia that Ippolito's condition had become even worse. Most alarming of all, the prince had completely stopped eating. Even when servants tried forcing his mouth open with metal tools, he refused to swallow anything. If this continued, it would only be a matter of time before he died. Gioia was furious. For months, everything had been stable. She could not understand why the situation had suddenly spiraled out of control. More than anything, she feared that if word got out, the reputation of the Brandeforti family would be ruined forever. Amid the chaos, Modesta stepped forward and deliberately took all the blame upon herself. Lowering her head, she said, "To avoid causing any more trouble for your highness, I ask permission to leave the estate. Perhaps that is the only way to put an end to this scandal." "Nonsense," Gioia snapped. "Enough. I am tired of hearing about this. I don't want another word on the subject." As someone who valued her family's honor above all else, Gioia understood that after such an embarrassing incident, she could not allow Modesta to leave. Doing so would be the same as admitting to the world that the Brandeforti family had something to hide. That night, Ippolito's terrifying screams echoed throughout the estate once again. Little Pony was so distressed that she could not sleep. Eventually, she quietly slipped into Modesta's room in the middle of the night. The two barely had time to speak before hurried footsteps echoed through the hallway. Little Pony immediately hid beneath the bed. The person entering the room was Princess Gioia herself. She had come in the middle of the night because she had something extremely important to discuss. Mixing persuasion with pressure, Gioia asked Modesta to renounce her religious vows and marry Ippolito. It was the solution she and Carmen had agreed upon. She then gave Modesta one night to consider the proposal before providing an answer the following morning. But just as Gioia turned to leave, Modesta called after her. "Your Highness," she said softly, "I can hear the regret in your voice. I owe you and your family more than I could ever repay. If you truly believe this is the right thing to do, then I will not refuse." Gioia was both surprised and delighted by the answer. Unwilling to risk any complications, she moved quickly. Only a few days later, a secret wedding was held late at night in the family's private chapel, officiated by a priest. After the ceremony, Modesta officially became a legitimate member of the Brandeforti family. It was an honor beyond anything most people could dream of, yet Gioia imposed one critical condition. Under no circumstances was Modesta to become pregnant. "I will not allow another scandal to stain the honor of the Brandeforti family. Do you understand?" she warned sternly. Hidden beneath the bed, Little Pony heard every word. Each sentence felt like a knife twisting in her heart. She could not accept that Modesta had agreed to marry a mentally disabled man for the sake of status and security, but Modesta had anticipated her reaction. Gently, she reassured her that it was a necessary sacrifice and promised that no matter what happened, she would always remain by her side. "Think about it," Modesta said. "If I marry him, I won't have to leave." Little Pony's innocence made her surprisingly easy to convince, and she accepted the explanation. After Little Pony left, Modesta could no longer contain her excitement. Gazing at her own shadow cast upon the wall, she whispered the words she had long dreamed of saying, "Hello, Princess." Her efforts had finally paid off, yet in Modesta's mind, this was only the beginning. She had secured what she needed to survive. Now it was time to pursue what she truly desired: power. Carmen was Princess Gioia's closest and most trusted confidant. If Modesta wanted to secure her place within the Brandeforti family, she knew she needed his support. It was far better to have him as an ally than an enemy. To achieve that, she would have to win over the most difficult man on the entire estate. One night, she went to see Carmen herself. The moment the door opened, a gun was pointed directly at her head, yet Modesta showed no fear. Instead, she angrily demanded to know why he had interfered in her personal affairs before unexpectedly slapping him twice across the face. "What does a young woman want when she comes to a man's house in the middle of the night?" Carmen asked coldly. Among intelligent people, long explanations are often unnecessary. That night, Modesta used her youth and charm to turn Carmen into an ally. The roots of such an extreme choice likely lay in her traumatic childhood. Years of abuse at her father's hands had distorted her view of the world and shaped a deeply flawed survival instinct. In her mind, her body was both a weapon and a bargaining tool. At dawn, Modesta quietly slipped out of Carmine's house. She had barely gone far when she encountered Rocco. It was obvious that what he had witnessed the previous night still haunted him. Pretending that Princess Gioia wanted to see her, he tricked Modesta into getting into his car. The vehicle soon sped down an isolated road, and it didn't take long for her to realize they were heading nowhere near town. No longer interested in pretending, Rocco finally confronted her. Furious, he demanded to know why she had betrayed him. "Now I understand what you really are," he shouted. "You're nothing but a whore." Modesta fired back immediately. "And you're nothing more than a weak man who couldn't keep the woman he wanted." Consumed by rage, Rocco grabbed her by the throat. He swore that he would return to the estate and expose everything, forcing Princess Gioia to see what kind of woman her future daughter-in-law really was. Modesta tried to calm him and manipulate the situation as she had done so many times before, but this time there seemed to be no way out. Too late, Rocco growled. You should have thought about that earlier. A long time later, Modesta finally crawled out of the vehicle. Ignoring the pain from her injuries, she staggered toward the driver's seat. First, she checked for breath by placing her finger beneath Rocco's nose. Still uncertain, she pressed a hand against his chest to feel for a heartbeat. Only after confirming that the threat was gone forever did she slowly make her way back to the estate. The final obstacle had been removed. Now it was time to reap the rewards of everything she had fought for. Rocco's death barely caused a ripple at the estate. Everyone accepted it as a tragic accident. The wedding proceeded exactly as planned. At one point, a servant casually remarked that thing was lucky to be marrying a beautiful woman like Modesta. She immediately corrected him. His name is Prince Ippolito. He has a name. He is not a thing. In truth, Modesta did not hate Ippolito at all. If anything, she felt sympathy for him. She had unconsciously transferred the emotions she once felt toward her younger sister onto him. She cared for Ippolito much like she would care for a younger sibling. Naturally, that kindness also strengthened her reputation among those around her. Fearing gossip and scandal, Princess Gioia arranged for the wedding to take place at 3 o'clock in the morning inside the family's private chapel. Only the priest and a handful of trusted servants were present. Ironically, Gioia herself, the groom's own mother, did not attend her son's wedding. Bruises still marked Modesta's face, yet she stood there wearing the very wedding dress Princess Gioia had worn years earlier. From a homeless orphan to a convent girl, from estate manager to mistress of the Brandeforti family, Modesta had steadily climbed toward the future she wanted. She refused to live by the passive rule society imposed on women, and because of that refusal, she gained more wealth, influence, and power than anyone ever imagined possible. The day after the wedding, Rocco's parents arrived from their hometown to collect their son's belongings. As the mistress of the estate, Modesta welcomed them warmly and, on Princess Gioia's behalf, provided them with a financial allowance. She handled the situation with remarkable grace, and people gradually began accepting her new position within the household. Not long afterward, joyful news arrived from afar. The war had finally ended. A wave of celebration swept through the estate. Servants looked forward to reuniting with their husbands, sons, and fathers after years of separation. Little Pony was especially overjoyed. At last, she believed she might return to Catania, the place she had long dreamed of seeing again. Yet Princess Gioia felt no joy at all. She forbade her family from joining ordinary people in celebrating the victory. To her, the war had never truly ended because her eldest son had died on the battlefield. In a cold voice, she declared that she would never return to Catania. They would remain here forever, living among the memories of the dead. Even after her own death, those who remained would continue guarding the spirits of the departed. When Little Pony dared to protest, Gioia cruelly dismissed her as a useless burden. Humiliated and heartbroken, she fled the room in tears. Watching the scene unfold, Modesta felt anger rising within her. She despised hypocrisy and hated being controlled by others. Despite her new title, the blood of common people still ran through her veins. Since her mother-in-law refused to face reality and embrace the joy of peace, Modesta decided to take a risk. As mistress of the estate, Modesta granted the servants time off and approved a celebration outside the property. After Gioia had gone to sleep, she secretly led Little Pony out of the estate. Together, they joined the servants gathered around a bonfire, singing, dancing, and celebrating the hard-earned peace that had come at such a terrible cost. In that moment, Modesta became more certain than ever about who she was. She was no one's servant, and she refused to be anyone's master. She was simply herself, and she intended to live life on her own terms. But the celebration was short-lived. Even as people rejoiced, a terrifying epidemic began spreading across the country. Soldiers returning from the front had unknowingly brought back what became known as the Spanish flu. The deadly virus spread with alarming speed. Doctors advised people to stay indoors, avoid unnecessary contact, disinfect surfaces, wash their hands regularly, and wear protective masks. Most importantly, they were urged to closely monitor the health of those around them. Before long, the first death from the flu occurred. Panic quickly spread throughout the estate. After stockpiling enough food to last an entire year, Carmen decided to return home and wait out the outbreak with his family. Only then did Modesta realize that he had always had a family of his own. Their relationship, in the end, had been little more than a fleeting passion, like sunlight dancing on water, beautiful but impossible to hold on to forever. To Modesta, romance was merely one small part of life. What truly mattered now was guiding the entire family safely through the epidemic. Even as conditions worsened, she remained remarkably calm, organizing every aspect of life on the estate with efficiency and precision. It was during this life and death crisis that Modesta grew stronger, more decisive, and more resilient than ever before. One by one, the servants on the estate fell ill. Even the longtime steward who had faithfully served the family for years could not escape the epidemic, yet amid all the sickness and despair, Modesta seemed to be gaining weight. Princess Gioia sarcastically remarked that she should eat less if she didn't want to lose her elegance and reveal her peasant origins. What Gioia didn't know was that Modesta was actually pregnant, and the child's father was not Ippolito, but Carmen. Can you imagine it? Modesta wondered to herself, a child running through these halls, laughing as it moves from room to room. She began dreaming of a new life, yet she could never forget the prohibition Gioia had imposed on her wedding night. She was never to become pregnant. Fate took a dramatic turn during a violent storm. Lightning struck the conservatory where Gioia kept her prized parrots. Amid the chaos, the princess suffered a serious fall and broke several ribs. Modesta reacted immediately. She dismissed the servants and took full responsibility for caring for Gioia herself. As for the princess, her pride would not allow anyone except Modesta to witness her vulnerability. Under Modesta's attentive care, the once gloomy estate seemed to regain a faint sense of warmth, but as the weeks passed, the secret she had worked so hard to conceal could no longer remain hidden. "Lift your skirt," Gioia suddenly ordered. When she saw the unmistakable curve of Modesta's growing belly, Gioia was stunned. "Impossible," she whispered. In that instant, every remaining layer of politeness and pretense between them vanished. Her anger erupted. Gioia was convinced that Modesta was carrying Ippolito's child. She repeated the warning she had given on the wedding night. She did not want the Brandeforti family producing another generation of deformed children. In her mind, the family curse had to end with her generation. Gioia issued a brutal ultimatum. Modesta had only two choices: either she would be cast out of the Brandeforti family and stripped of every inheritance right, or she would summon a doctor immediately and terminate the pregnancy in Gioia's presence. The princess went even further, insisting that she wanted to personally witness the end of that unborn life. Those threats only fueled Modesta's rebellious spirit. The child growing inside her was more than a new life. It represented her dream of becoming a mother and the continuation of her own bloodline. More importantly, Modesta refused to let anyone else dictate her destiny ever again. Modesta began searching through old medical texts in the library. In one ancient volume, she found a description of a particular berry that could cause a slow death if consumed in excessive amounts over time. Methodically and carefully, she set her plan in motion without leaving any obvious trace. Ironically, the flu epidemic became the perfect cover. Claiming that Gioia's condition had worsened, she forbade anyone from visiting the princess. Even little Pony was gently but deliberately kept away. Modesta had effectively isolated Gioia within her own room, yet at the same time she became the princess's only remaining source of comfort. In that vast estate, two women who had been bound together by a calculated and unconventional marriage found themselves becoming the only people who could truly confide in one another. Princess Gioia sank into her chair and drifted back into memories of her glorious past. She spoke endlessly about Leonora, painting vivid images of her daughter as she remembered her. According to Gioia, Leonora had been remarkably similar to herself. In their youth, both women had loved teasing, charming, and provoking others. They were like beautiful double-edged swords, fragile yet dangerous. Gioia bitterly remarked that if Leonora had been born a man, those same traits would have been celebrated as irresistible charisma rather than condemned. Whenever they spoke of Leonora, Modesta and Gioia briefly found themselves sharing the same memories, yet that fleeting warmth was not enough to shake Modesta's resolve. Her plan had already gone too far to abandon. At first, she had intended to kill Gioia with poison, but the princess had anticipated the possibility long before. Modesta's repeated delays in bringing in a doctor convinced Gioia that something was wrong. That was when the princess revealed her final move. She had already drafted a new will stating that anyone who bore a child would receive none of the family fortune. Instead, the entire estate would be donated to charity. Modesta, after everything she had done, would be left with nothing but an empty title and eventually be reduced to poverty. Modesta had never expected Gioia to be holding such a devastating card in reserve. Instantly, the old feeling of being manipulated and controlled resurfaced. Meanwhile, Gioia calmly asked for another glass of water and even mocked the smile on Modesta's face. Desperate, Modesta searched every corner of the estate. She swore she would find and destroy the new will, yet every effort failed. As much as she hated Gioia for tormenting her, she could not help admiring the older woman's ruthlessness and cunning. Based on the amount of poison already consumed, the next dose would be the final one. Gioia's once radiant golden hair had lost its shine, like a rose withering away. Modesta silently watched as she drained the final cup. Not long afterward, the princess collapsed beside her bed, bringing her proud and tragic life to an end. Yet the missing will still haunted Modesta. Despite the epidemic and everyone's objections, she insisted on holding Gioia's funeral at the church. In truth, she had only one reason for doing so. She desperately needed to find someone. That person was Carmen. Gioia probably never imagined that her most trusted ally had already chosen a different side. The princess entrusted the will to me, Carmen told Modesta. She trusted me completely. Thanks to Carmine's careful planning, the transfer of power proceeded smoothly. Everyone believed that Gaia had died without leaving a will. Legally, Ippolito became the primary heir. In reality, however, he was little more than a figurehead, as his wife, Modesta, became the true power behind the estate. The ambitious young woman had finally mastered the art of power. Once in control, Modesta wisely distributed part of the family wealth to earn loyalty. She also followed Leonora's example by establishing a lifelong allowance for Little Pony. Only after every loose end had been tied up did she finally return to her room. There, she opened the fireplace and tossed the will into the flames. Within moments, the dancing fire reduced the final thread to ashes. The fire from her childhood had once taken everything from her. Now, another fire symbolized a new beginning. Step by step, along a path paved with ambition, manipulation, and survival, Modesta finally claimed the throne of the Brandeforti family and emerged as the true ruler of a new generation. At last, the baby was born safely. The arrival of a new life seemed to lift the darkness that had hung over the estate for years. Modesta immersed herself in the joy of motherhood. Not long afterward, she, the young prince of the family, and Little Pony bid farewell to the country estate and its loyal servants before setting out for Catania, the city they had dreamed of returning to for so long. During the journey, Modesta seemed to catch fleeting glimpses of all the people who had disappeared from her life. The carriage still rattled along the road just as it always had, but the young girl who once became sick from every ride had transformed into a calm and commanding matriarch. Catania was far more vibrant and glamorous than the countryside. When their carriage arrived at the magnificent Brandeforti palace, a crowd of aristocrats was already waiting to welcome them. Modesta maintained a polite smile throughout, yet everyone gathered around Little Pony and the child, laughing and celebrating, while she was largely ignored, as if she were invisible. Even after the crowd disappeared up the grand staircase and the laughter faded away, Modesta remained standing where she was. She had inherited the title of a princess, but not the respect that came with it. In the end, she quietly turned around and walked away alone. Having never truly lived in a great city, Modesta felt completely lost. Like a startled deer, she wandered through narrow streets before accidentally entering a church. The grandeur and solemnity of the place left her feeling suffocated. She quickly fled, removed her luxurious coat, and ran toward the shoreline, drawn by an invisible call she could not ignore. Modesta slowly walked forward, holding her breath as she took in the view. Before her stretched an endless blue sea meeting the horizon. It was the ocean and the stars she had dreamed about her entire life, peaceful, profound, and vast enough to embrace everything. She gazed up at the sky in awe, and in that moment, the ambition that had always burned quietly within her awakened once again. The aristocrats living comfortably in their world had no idea that a new storm was already beginning to form. And so, our story comes to an end. Through her radical choices, Modesta completely shattered the traditional image of womanhood, becoming a deeply controversial figure. Yet that very extremism was also a powerful act of rebellion against the society of her time. In an era when women were expected to serve others or live under someone else's control, Modesta wanted to become the master of her own destiny. Her words, "I am no one's servant, and no one's master," revealed a fierce desire to live free from every chain and limitation. Born into poverty yet always looking up at the stars, Modesta carried the dream of freedom in her blood from an early age. As an adult, she simply chose the most extreme path possible to reclaim control over her life, because true awakening is never about compromise. Like Modesta herself, it is about carving out your own path through a world of thorns, even when you must bleed to do it. Modesta's madness is both terrifying and fascinating because she represents desires that many people secretly carry but rarely dare to express. When we examine this story of ambition, desire, love and violence, we are really confronting the part of human nature that refuses to submit. Every time we try to understand Modesta, we are also forced to reflect on our own hunger for freedom, power and self-determination. And that brings this story to its conclusion. Thank you all for watching and following along. See you again in the next recap.